Hey, Steve Saretsky here. As always, Canadian real estate market update with a particular focus on Vancouver. If you get any sort of value or entertainment out of these videos, all I ask that you hit thumbs up and subscribe. Questions, comments, put those below. I want to touch this week on the Bank of Canada coming out again this week with another update on their monetary policy stance, opting to keep interest rates stuck on the floor at 0%. And again, reiterating that they will be holding these rates to the floor until at least, their words, not mine, at least 2023. At the same time, despite some critics coming out and suggesting, oh, maybe the Bank of Canada will slowly start to taper back some of this QE. The economy is doing a little bit better than anticipated. Wrong. The Bank of Canada came out maintaining their $4 billion of QE per week, aka money printing. Let's get a live look at the Bank of Canada's balance sheet. Inflating, still going, inflating. Next stop, the moon. The balance sheet, again, it shows no signs of slowing down. So the money printing, or I should say the beatings, will continue until morale improves. And again, this has obviously been a key driver of the real estate market, particularly here in Canada. That's what someone actually circulated. I don't know who did this, but kudos. Basically, picture here of Tiff Macklem bailing out his boomer buddies. I made the joke that maybe Tiff Macklem is long 3 or 4 pre-sales. Now, everybody seems to think that just because house prices are inflating with really no fundamentals, that the Bank of Canada is going to come in and do the right thing. Surely they must see the excesses that they are creating and the societal problems that they are creating, that surely the Bank of Canada will come in and raise interest rates to stem the rampant house price inflation. But again, you're just because that's what you think is the morale or the right thing to do is not. The Bank of Canada does not have housing or real estate in their models. They don't specifically target house prices. Again, they have a basket, a flawed basket, which says if inflation is not 2, we print money. If inflation is not 2%, we print money. And again, I think that basket is prone to manipulation. Obviously, everybody knows that real inflation is higher than 2%. And so they continue to create these consequences for that. And one of those consequences, as I've talked about before, is the divide between the haves and the have-not. So again, if you've owned assets during this money printing phase, which is quantitative easing, if you look again at the Bank of England's website, one of the intended, not unintended, the intended consequences of QE is to raise asset prices, because the view is, through a central banker's mindset, is that by raising asset prices, you then create this wealth effect, and the wealth effect will basically trickle down. So for example, house prices go up, people feel good, you then leverage that asset to go buy another asset, you do a home renovation, you go buy a second car, because look, you're a millionaire on paper. And so let's look at the recent data that just came out from Stats Canada. In the 2020 housing boom, everybody talks about the pandemic and the recession and all the job losses. And I said from the get-go, I've been saying this for the last 7 or 8 months, this has been or is the gilded recession. Canadian homeowners added $1 trillion to their net worth in 2020, based on pretty much the majority of that coming through rising house prices. So again, for those that have owned, it added about $66,000 per household in terms of their overall net worth. Again, obviously you got to sell to realize that gain. I understand that. But if you context that with somebody that a renting household, for example, they added less than $5,000. So you had $66,000 for the homeowners and $5,000 for the renter. So again, to suggest that the Bank of Canada doesn't, or central banks for that matter, don't increase inequality is fundamentally flawed. They are blowing massive societal problems. You can't print money and not have repercussions. So lest I digest, We also had David Rosenberg, who I really enjoy. I think he's a smart guy. I don't necessarily agree with everything he said, but had some choice words for Tiff Macklem this past week. So let's hear Rosie right here.
I have to ask about something else that we're addressing, which is the housing market here. And I am curious to know, against your thesis on where we go from here, what do you think is the outlook for the housing market in this country?
Well, I mean, I think that it's in a, it's in a huge bubble, and it might be even a bigger bubble. This is where I might disagree with Tiff Macklem. This might be one of the biggest bubbles of all time. Of course, it's being predicated on where mortgage rates are. But we have a situation where, home prices are up 18% year over year with practically no wage growth. So, when you mean revert series and you mean revert home prices to income, it looks like a dot-com stock in 2000, 2001. So I'm pretty wary about the valuations in residential real estate. Would I be going out and buying a home today as an investment in Canada or in the GTA? Absolutely not. I would just assume going to the stock market.
So Rosie. Again, I've been a huge fan of his. I think he's one of the best Canadian economists here. Don't necessarily always agree with his thoughts. I mean, I certainly don't agree with his thoughts on Bitcoin being a massive bubble. So I think that where Rosie, I think he's right in the fact that it's arguably been a housing bubble here since 2006. It's just, this has been the widowmaker trade. I mean, somebody trying to short the housing market has just been absolutely bludgeoned to death. I mean, first of all, there's no clean way to short housing, but people have basically been saying there's going to be a crash forever. And I would certainly argue valuations are extreme, and they probably should have corrected a long time ago, and they should have corrected in 2020. But this is the problem. When you have central banks coming in and manipulating the free markets, the price of money, and by basically just printing as much money as you can to basically paper over any sort of problems, you destroy free markets. And so that's why every single asset class is going up. So again, Rosenberg talks about a Canadian housing bubble. The bubble is in the sovereign debt market. The bubble is in the bond market, which is heavily manipulated and basically has been destroyed by the central banks. And so what I find interesting throughout all of this is, we've talked about this on the show numerous times, is that everybody goes, oh my God, again, look at yields. Look at yields. They're backing up. Canada 5 years still going up. We've got another increase in the mortgage rates coming up here. So you'll see mortgage rates have gone from about 1.5 to 2 to about, we're looking to get to about 210 now, 220. So mortgage rates are going up. Everybody starts freaking out and says, oh my gosh, look at the bond market. The bond market's going to come in and just blow everything up. And assuming that, again, that people are somehow forgetting, they think that, I think that people are clinging to the idea that there's still a free market and that these things are actually going to be allowed to move up. And so this is where my difference of opinions, I have a differing of opinions in terms of how things will play out, because my view is that the markets are so manipulated that even though housing, for example, can be highly overvalued, arguably the activity, as Rosenberg said, prices up 18% with zero wage growth, zero population growth. Arguably that's symptomatic of a housing bubble. But if you continue to distort the markets, how do you substantial put like price metrics in? Like traditional finance should say, well, things revert to the mean and we have these boom bust cycles, but when you continue to paper over, so for example, yields have been going up. Everybody's aware of that. Yields going up. Everyone watched the bond market. Oh my God, inflation. And then you had this past week, just watch this, because like if people actually think that like the Bank of Canada is not talking about, so like the Federal Reserve or like the central banks are, look at the ECB. So the ECB comes out this past week. They're probably one of the largest price manipulators out there. The European Central Bank comes out and says, Christine Lagarde, right here, ECB.
Market interest rates have increased since the start of the year, which poses a risk to wider financing conditions. Banks use risk-free interest rates and sovereign bond yields as key references for determining credit conditions. If sizable and persistent increases in these market interest rates, when left unchecked, could translate into a premature tightening of financing conditions for all sectors of the economy. This is undesirable at a time when preserving favorable financing conditions still remains necessary to reduce uncertainty and bolster confidence, thereby underpinning economic activity and safeguarding medium-term price stability.
So what Christine Lagarde goes on to say is that because yields are going up, these are unfavorable. We do not like rising yields. This will not be allowed to happen. So what does the ECB do this past week? They have ramped up their purchases. More money printing. Print more money. Print more money. Buy more government bonds. Kill yields. Squash them. And that is exactly what they've done. So without the ECB coming out and saying yield curve control, i.e. we are setting a price on this government bond, this debt instrument, instead of them coming out and physically saying we're targeting this rate, they merely just expanded their purchases and they went further out on the curve to lower those rates. And so this is yield curve control. This is yield curve control without implicitly saying yield curve control. It's already being done. And it's the same in the Bank of Japan and everything. And obviously Australia came out, it was a couple of weeks ago, where the yields were backing up in Australia, and the RBA, same thing. What did they do? Ramped up their purchases and just hammered yields. And so this is the fate of bond markets. You don't have bond markets anymore. You don't have free markets. So anybody in the future that comes in and complains about policymakers, foreign buyer taxes, mortgage stress tests, saying, "Oh, you guys are interfering in the free market." There's no free market. It hasn't existed for a while, and I think it's been more evident than anything in the past decade of how far the authorities are willing to go. So this is what I've been trying to sort of emphasize on Twitter, and I get so many DMs. Probably the biggest thing that I get from particularly younger buyers, and it's a valid concern. The biggest question I get, the biggest concern that anyone has is, what happens in 5 years when I go to renew my mortgage and rates are through the roof? That's the biggest concern I get. And I get it. It should be a concern. It should be something that you're thinking about. And that's maybe cause for concern that maybe you shouldn't completely over leverage, but to think that you actually think, like, where's society going to be if yields actually just rip up higher and nobody can afford their mortgage, or the corporations can't service again? You're going to have much bigger problems, and the last thing you'll be thinking about in that environment is the valuation of your house. That'll be the last thing you'll be thinking about. So if you have massive increase in renewal rates in 5 years, it's likely because you'll have rampant inflation. The only way you're getting rampant inflation is if you also have rampant wage growth as well. So that obviously would offset it. Policymakers would come in with longer amortization. And again, I'm not saying there's not going to be any would never be a correction in housing, but people need to understand these dynamics. It's like, it's not just like one and the same. It's not like just yields blow out through and everything else stays the same. Like, there'll be reasons for that, but I think that's the one thing. And I say, well, what if? I agree. That's, again, don't get me wrong. This is one of the biggest concerns. I think about this almost on a daily basis. So I'm like, man, what if yields just went up? What if your 5-year mortgage went from 2% to 5%? What if? Like, what happened to me, for example, or anyone else? Now, I would play a contrarian scenario for you as well. Now, what happens if, against everybody's beliefs and views, what happens if for the next 10 years, let's say 20 years, yields stay where they're at? They implement yield curve control, the bond market essentially ceases to exist, It's basically entirely owned by the central bank. They monetize the government's debts. And you had to have basically zero yields, like for the next 20 years. So an era of like financial repression. What then? Like people don't also contemplate that as a possible scenario. They just say, well, of course rates have to go up. Well, what if as opposed to them going up, they just stayed where they are for 20 years? Because if you actually look at the underlying fundamentals of it, debt in itself is deflationary. The demographics that we have today are very deflationary. And you also have technology, which is also very deflationary. So you have debt, demographics, and technology, all of which are inflationary, could very well signify that you might just have low rates for a very long time. And I think Japan is obviously a very eloquent example of this. And so what I would ultimately say is I understand there's a lot of things to think about. And that's the whole point of this video and of this show, is to have that conversation, to get people thinking. So the ability to have critical thinking, the ability to have to create your own thoughts and to actually sit down and try to figure it out for yourself. Because I hate probably the most common question. So the second common question would be, what happens when rates go up 5 years? The number one question that I get, that everybody asks me, is, should I buy? Is now a good time to buy? That's the number one question I get. Is now a good time to buy? Should I buy? It's like, dude, you gotta think for yourself, man. This is like, I can't make a decision for you. First of all, I don't even know who you are. You just slid in my DMs. Number two, how much money do you make? Do you have any debt? Why are you buying? Where are you living? What are you doing for work? What's your, what other investments do you have? Like, people just want like a simplified answer. Should I buy? Or will rates go up? Should I go fixed or like, it's just like, it's such a simplistic question. Everybody's looking for the answer. Think for yourself, think critically. That's the whole point of these videos. Anyways, I digress, I ramble on. I hope this video helped. As always, every Saturday, we'll see you next week.